Emma Thompson's pen froze mid-sentence, her sleeve catching on the desk edge as 20 pairs of eyes suddenly fixed on her exposed forearm. The sweet, sickly smell that had been bothering her classmates all morning suddenly made terrifying sense. It wasn't a simple cut from her coffee shop job. It was something much worse. Professor Harrison's coffee mug shattered against the linoleum floor, his face draining of all color as he stumbled backward. "Dear God," he whispered, then louder, "Everyone out, now!" Students scrambled over chairs, backpacks tumbling, someone retching at the putrid odor now filling Biology 301. Emma's grandmother had warned her about that smell, sweet like rotting fruit, the scent of flesh dying from within, the same smell that haunted Dot's nightmares from her nursing days in Korea. "Call 911!" Harrison shouted, his voice cracking with terror as he blocked the door. "Tell them we need hazmat protocols." What had been growing beneath that innocent bandage? And how long did Emma have before it killed her? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 weeks earlier, Emma Thompson had stood at the Greyhound station in Millerville, Wisconsin, clutching a worn duffel bag and her grandmother's rosary. The small farming town of 3,200 souls stretched behind her like a faded photograph. Shuttered storefronts, rusted grain silos, and the skeletal remains of the Hartwell manufacturing plant that had once employed half the county. Her father, Robert, waved from the pickup truck, his weathered face trying to mask the worry lines that had deepened since his heart attack 6 months prior. "You make us proud, sweetheart," her mother, Linda, had whispered that morning, pressing a crumpled $20 bill into Emma's palm. "This education, it's our way out." Linda worked double shifts at Murphy's Diner and cleaned offices until midnight, her hands permanently stained with bleach and coffee grounds. The family's modest 2-bedroom house carried a second mortgage to pay for Robert's cardiac medications, each pill costing more than most families spent on groceries. Emma's acceptance to the University of Wisconsin-Madison had arrived like a miracle wrapped in official letterhead. The merit scholarship covered 75% of tuition, but the remaining costs still stretched the Thompson family budget to its breaking point. Every textbook, every meal plan dollar, every dorm fee represented sacrifice measured in Linda's missed dinners and Robert's skipped prescription refills. At 78, grandmother Dorothy "Dot" Thompson served as the family's emotional anchor and practical wisdom keeper. A former Army nurse who had served in Korea, Dot possessed an uncanny ability to diagnose everything from strep throat to heartbreak with equal precision. Her gnarled hands, scarred from decades of caring for others, would gently examine Emma's childhood scrapes while sharing stories of treating wounded soldiers in makeshift hospitals. "Pain teaches us compassion," Dot would say, "but it shouldn't teach us helplessness." The University of Wisconsin campus overwhelmed Emma with its Gothic limestone buildings and manicured quads. Students moved with the confident ease of those accustomed to belonging, their conversations peppered with references to spring breaks in Cabo and summer internships at their father's firms. Emma's second-hand textbooks, duct-tape sneakers, and thrift store wardrobe marked her as distinctly different from her peers. To bridge the financial gap, Emma secured a work-study position at Bean Barrel, an upscale coffee shop near campus that catered to students with more money than sense. The establishment prided itself on artisanal everything: hand-pulled espresso, locally sourced pastries, and Instagram-worthy presentation that justified charging $8 for what Murphy's Diner back home called coffee with fancy milk. Ashley Parker, the owner's daughter, initially befriended Emma with the casual generosity of someone who had never questioned whether she could afford lunch. Blonde, perfectly groomed, and equipped with 50,000 Instagram followers, Ashley documented her privileged college experience with the dedication of a war correspondent. Her father, Richard, owned a chain of Bean Barrel franchises across the Midwest, built on the premise that college students would pay premium prices for the illusion of sophistication. Emma's dormitory room, shared with a perpetually absent roommate, became her sanctuary for late-night studying and careful budgeting. Monday morning arrived with the brutal efficiency of a Midwest winter, and Emma's alarm buzzed at 5:15 a.m. in her cramped dormitory room. The Bean Barrel opening shift paid an extra $1 per hour, money she desperately needed for textbooks and her family's mounting bills. She pulled on her uniform polo shirt, the fabric still carrying the lingering aroma of yesterday's espresso and steamed milk, and walked the 6 blocks to campus in the pre-dawn darkness. The coffee shop occupied a prime corner location, its exposed brick walls and Edison bulb fixtures designed to evoke industrial chic rather than genuine working-class aesthetics. Emma unlocked the front door and immediately noticed the new equipment dominating the sandwich prep station, a gleaming commercial deli slicer that looked like it belonged in a high-end delicatessen rather than a college coffee shop. "Corporate sent that beauty over the weekend," announced Jake Morrison, the assistant manager, as he emerged from the back office with a clipboard thick with inspection checklists. "Regionals coming through next week, and they want to see our artisanal sandwich program in full swing. Fresh sliced everything, premium presentation, the whole 9 yards." Emma examined the machine's razor-sharp blade and intimidating mechanical precision. Growing up in a household where her father worked with industrial equipment, she recognized the importance of proper safety protocols. But Jake was already rushing through the morning setup, his anxiety about the corporate visit overriding normal caution. "Did anyone go through training on this thing?" Emma asked, noting the absence of safety guards and proper instruction manuals. "How hard can it be? Meat goes in, slices come out," Jake replied, already moving on to inventory counts. "We're behind schedule and the morning rush starts in 40 minutes. Just use common sense and don't stick your fingers where they don't belong." The breakfast crowd descended with the fury of caffeine-dependent college students facing Monday morning lectures. Emma found herself juggling espresso orders while simultaneously prepping sandwiches on the unfamiliar equipment. The deli slicer's blade moved with mechanical precision, but the safety mechanism seemed inconsistent. Sometimes the guard locked properly, sometimes it slipped. By 7:30 a.m. the line stretched out the door, and Ashley Parker burst through the entrance with her usual dramatic flair. Her phone was already recording, capturing what she called authentic morning coffee culture for her Instagram story. "Emma, you're trending in my coffee content. People love the hard-working, small-town girl aesthetic you bring to the brand." Emma forced a smile while expertly pulling shots and steaming milk. Ashley's casual commodification of her economic circumstances stung, but she needed this job too much to risk confrontation. She focused on the repetitive rhythm of coffee preparation, finding comfort in the familiar routine even as the new sandwich station demanded her attention. The accident happened during the 8 a.m. rush, when the deli slicer's safety guard malfunctioned while Emma was preparing fresh tomatoes for the breakfast sandwiches. The blade caught her forearm as she reached to adjust the positioning, slicing through her uniform sleeve and creating a 2-inch gash that immediately began bleeding profusely. "Oh God, Emma!" Ashley shrieked, her phone instinctively rising to record before she caught herself and lowered it. "Someone get the first aid kit." Jake appeared with a basic medical kit that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. The bandages were yellowed with age and the antiseptic had crystallized in its bottle. "Just clean it up and wrap it tight," he instructed, his eyes darting nervously between Emma's wound and the growing line of impatient customers. "We can't shut down the prep station during rush hour." Emma's grandmother had taught her basic wound care from her nursing experience, but this cut clearly needed professional medical attention. The gash was deeper than it initially appeared, and the bleeding wasn't responding to direct pressure. However, a trip to the emergency room meant hours away from work, lost wages she couldn't afford, and medical bills that would devastate her family's already strained budget. "I'll be fine," Emma insisted, applying hydrogen peroxide and wrapping the wound with gauze and medical tape. "It looks worse than it is." Richard Parker arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by Jake's panicked phone call. The older man's calculating eyes immediately assessed the situation. Blood on the prep surface, a potentially injured employee, and liability exposure that could threaten his expanding franchise empire. He surveyed the scene with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crises through careful damage control. "Emma, dear," he said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of a successful businessman, "accidents happen in food service. The important thing is that you're okay, and we handle this properly." He produced a crisp incident report form and guided her through questions designed to minimize the severity of the injury and the company's potential responsibility. "Just sign here acknowledging that you followed all safety protocols and that this was an unavoidable accident," Richard explained, offering her a pen with gold trim. "And here's $200 cash to cover any medical expenses." No need to involve insurance companies or create unnecessary paperwork. Wednesday evening arrived with the deceptive calm that often precedes life-altering storms. Emma sat at her small dormitory desk, struggling to concentrate on her organic chemistry homework as a persistent fever clouded her thoughts. The wound on her forearm throbbed with increasing intensity, and the bandage felt uncomfortably warm against her skin. What had started as a manageable injury on Monday morning was transforming into something far more sinister. The red streaks radiating from the cut had appeared Tuesday afternoon, spider webbing across her pale skin like angry lightning. Emma had initially dismissed them as normal healing, remembering her grandmother's stories about wounds that looked worse before they looked better. But by Wednesday morning, her temperature had climbed to 101.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And an unusual sweet odor emanated from beneath the increasingly soggy bandages. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Dad's cardiologist wants to see him again Friday. New medication isn't working like they hoped. How are classes going, sweetheart?" Emma stared at the message, knowing that another specialist visit meant another copay they couldn't afford, another prescription that would strain the family budget beyond its breaking point. She typed back, "Everything's great, Mom. Acing all my midterms. Don't worry about me." The lie felt heavy in her chest, but Emma couldn't bear the thought of adding her medical concerns to her family's already overwhelming financial burden. Her father's heart condition had already forced them to take a second mortgage on their modest house, and her mother was working herself to exhaustion at 2 jobs. Emma's education represented their collective hope for a better future. She refused to jeopardize it over what she desperately hoped was just a stubborn infection. A soft knock interrupted her troubled thoughts. "Come in," she called, quickly pulling down her sleeve to cover the increasingly alarming wound. Ashley Parker entered with an armload of expensive coffee and pastries from Bean Barrel, her usual peace offering when she sensed tension in their friendship. "Thought you might need some caffeine fuel for studying," she announced cheerfully, but her expression grew concerned as she noticed Emma's flushed face and glassy eyes. "You look terrible. Are you getting sick?" "Just tired," Emma replied, accepting the coffee gratefully despite the way its rich aroma seemed to intensify her nausea. "Midterms are kicking my butt, and I've been pulling too many double shifts at work." Ashley settled into the uncomfortable desk chair, her designer jeans and cashmere sweater, a stark contrast to Emma's thrift store clothing and second-hand furniture. "About work," she began hesitantly. "I've been meaning to ask you something. Monday's accident with the deli slicer, was that really your fault?" "Because I've been watching my dad's emails and there's been some weird correspondence about incident management and liability mitigation." Emma's fever-addled brain struggled to process Ashley's implications. "What kind of correspondence?" "Corporate memos about minimizing worker compensation claims and strategies for avoiding health department investigations," Ashley explained, her privileged guilt evident in her increasingly uncomfortable expression. I think there might have been other accidents at other locations, Emma. Similar equipment problems that got covered up or downplayed. The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. The $200 in cash, the hastily signed incident reports, her father's insistence that she handle the medical costs privately. It all suddenly made sinister sense. Richard Parker hadn't been looking out for her welfare. He'd been protecting his business empire from potential liability exposure. "I need to lie down," Emma mumbled, the room spinning slightly as her fever spiked higher. The sweet smell from her bandage seemed to be growing stronger, and she noticed Ashley unconsciously wrinkling her nose. "Emma, when's the last time you changed that bandage?" Ashley asked, concern replacing her earlier guilt. "It smells strange." "This morning," Emma lied, though it had actually been since Monday evening. The thought of removing the dressing and confronting whatever was happening beneath it filled her with dread. "It's healing fine, just a little infected." Ashley leaned closer, her expression shifting from concern to alarm. "That's not what normal infection smells like. My mom had MRSA after her surgery last year, and it had this weird, sweet odor. Emma, you need to see a doctor. Tonight." "I can't afford a doctor," Emma snapped, her fever making her more irritable than usual. "Do you have any idea what an emergency room visit costs? My family would lose the house." "No, I'm handling this with over-the-counter antibiotics and proper wound care." "But what if it's something serious? What if what?" Emma's voice rose dangerously. "What if I'm dying? What if your family's unsafe equipment gave me some horrible infection? What exactly am I supposed to do about it, Ashley? Sue your father with lawyers I can't afford? Take time off work I desperately need? Skip classes that my scholarship requires?" Ashley recoiled as if slapped, finally confronting the vast gulf between their economic realities. For Emma, medical care wasn't a simple phone call to the family physician. It was a complex calculation of financial survival versus physical health. Every decision carried consequences that could ripple through generations of economic struggle. "I could pay for the doctor visit," Ashley offered quietly. "My trust fund." "No." Emma's voice carried the finality of wounded pride. "I don't need your charity. I need your father's company to take responsibility for unsafe working conditions, but we both know that's not going to happen." Ashley left shortly afterward, her expensive offerings forgotten on Emma's desk. Alone again, Emma finally gathered the courage to examine her wound properly. She peeled back the bandage with trembling fingers, revealing skin that had taken on an alarming grayish tinge around the original cut. The sweet smell intensified dramatically, and she noticed dark spots along the edges of the wound that definitely hadn't been there Monday. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes being poor costs more than being rich, child." Dot had seen infections like this during her nursing days in Korea, and Emma suddenly understood why her grandmother had looked so worried when examining the wound Tuesday night. But tomorrow was her organic chemistry midterm, worth 30% of her final grade. Her scholarship required maintaining a 3.5 GPA. Missing the exam could jeopardize everything her family had sacrificed to achieve. Emma rewrapped the wound and tried to convince herself that 24 more hours wouldn't matter. Thursday morning arrived with Emma's fever spiking to 102.8 degrees, but she forced herself out of bed anyway. Her organic chemistry midterm represented 30% of her final grade, and missing it would require a medical excuse she couldn't afford to obtain. She swallowed 3 ibuprofen tablets, pulled on a long-sleeved sweatshirt to hide the increasingly alarming wound, and stumbled across campus to the science building. The walk that normally took 10 minutes stretched into an exhausting 20-minute ordeal. Each step sent jolts of pain radiating from her infected arm, and the sweet, putrid smell seemed to follow her like a toxic cloud. Other students gave her a wide berth in the hallways, unconsciously responding to the odor that Emma prayed wasn't as noticeable as it seemed to her fever-addled senses. Biology 301 occupied a large lecture hall in the basement of the science building, its tiered seating designed to accommodate 200 students. Emma chose a seat in the back row, hoping to minimize her interactions with classmates who might notice her deteriorating condition. The fluorescent lights felt brutally bright against her fever-sensitive eyes, and she struggled to focus on Professor Michael Harrison's pre-exam instructions. Professor Harrison, a tall man in his early 50s with graying temples and wire-rimmed glasses, had built his reputation on demanding academic excellence while maintaining genuine concern for his students' welfare. His own daughter Sarah had died of meningitis 15 years earlier, a tragedy that had left him hypervigilant about signs of serious illness among the young people in his care. Today's examination covers bacterial pathogenesis, antibiotic resistance mechanisms, and infectious disease transmission, Professor Harrison announced, his voice carrying clearly through the lecture hall. You have 90 minutes, and remember, understanding these concepts could literally save lives someday. Emma tried to concentrate on the exam questions, but her vision kept blurring, and her hand trembled as she attempted to write. The multiple-choice questions about bacterial infections felt grimly ironic given her current condition, and she found herself wondering if any of the pathogenic organisms described in her textbook were currently eating away at her own tissue. Halfway through the exam, Emma realized she needed to remove her sweatshirt. The fever was making her dangerously overheated, and sweat was soaking through her clothing despite the cool basement temperature. She glanced around nervously, then slowly pulled her arms out of the sleeves, revealing a long-sleeved t-shirt underneath that she hoped would continue concealing her bandaged wound. The relief was immediate but short-lived. As she reached for her pencil to continue the exam, her sleeve caught on the edge of her desk and pulled up several inches, exposing the bottom edge of her bandage. The gauze had become saturated with a yellowish discharge that had soaked through to stain her shirt sleeve, and the sweet, nauseating odor intensified dramatically in the confined space. "Oh my God! What is that smell?" whispered Katie Chen, the pre-med student sitting 2 seats away. She turned toward Emma with a concerned expression that quickly shifted to alarm as she noticed the discolored bandage and the grayish pallor of Emma's visible skin. Emma quickly tugged her sleeve back down, but the damage was done. The smell continued to permeate the immediate area, and other students began looking around with expressions of disgust and concern. She considered fleeing to the bathroom, but standing up would only draw more attention to her deteriorating condition. Professor Harrison, who had been walking through the aisles monitoring the exam, paused near Emma's row. His nostrils flared slightly as he detected the unmistakable odor, and his expression shifted from casual supervision to sharp medical concern. As a father who had lost a child to a rapidly progressing infection, he recognized the distinctive sweet smell of necrotic tissue. "Miss Thompson," he said quietly, approaching her desk with careful steps. "May I speak with you outside for a moment?" Emma's fever-clouded judgment led her to make a desperate mistake. Instead of quietly following Professor Harrison's request, she attempted to continue working on her exam while simultaneously trying to adjust her position to better conceal the wound. As she shifted in her seat, her sleeve rode up again, this time exposing nearly 4 inches of her forearm. The bandage had completely saturated and partially unraveled, revealing skin that had turned an alarming purple-black color around the original wound. The infection had clearly spread far beyond the initial cut, creating a roughly circular area of dying tissue that looked like something from a medical horror textbook. Dark streaks radiated outward from the central necrosis, and the sweet smell of putrefaction became overwhelming in the enclosed lecture hall. Professor Harrison's coffee mug slipped from his fingers and shattered against the concrete floor, the sharp crack echoing through the suddenly silent room. His face drained of all color as professional recognition collided with personal trauma. "Dear God," he whispered. Then louder, his voice cracking with terror. "Everyone out! Everyone out now!" The students sat frozen for a moment, processing the unprecedented panic in their usually composed professor's voice. "This is not a drill!" Professor Harrison shouted, rushing to the emergency alarm near the podium. "Evacuate the building immediately! Do not touch anything on your way out!" Chaos erupted as 200 students suddenly understood that something was genuinely wrong. Chairs scraped against concrete as people scrambled to gather their belongings, backpacks tumbled down the tiered seating, and the narrow aisles became bottlenecks of panicked humanity. Several students dropped their exam papers in their haste to escape, while others clutched their tests protectively despite the emergency. "Is it anthrax?" someone shouted from the back of the room. "Chemical spill?" another voice called out. "Everyone stay calm and move quickly to the exits," Professor Harrison commanded, though his own voice betrayed his fear. He grabbed his cell phone with trembling fingers and dialed 911. "This is Professor Harrison at the University of Wisconsin Science Building. I need an emergency medical team and hazmat protocols. We have a student with what appears to be necrotizing fasciitis." Emma sat paralyzed in her seat, watching her classmates flee from her like she had transformed into something monstrous. The academic dreams that had sustained her through years of poverty and sacrifice crumbled around her as she became the center of a medical emergency that would undoubtedly end her educational aspirations. The scholarship that represented her family's hope for economic mobility would disappear along with her ability to continue her studies. "Miss Thompson," Professor Harrison said, approaching her carefully while maintaining a safe distance, "I need you to remain very still. Help is coming, and we're going to get you the medical attention you need." "I can't afford medical attention," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her fever-flushed cheeks. "My family can't afford this." "My scholarship." "Your scholarship will be there when you recover," Professor Harrison assured her, though privately he wondered if she would survive long enough to worry about academic standing. The necrotizing fasciitis he had observed was clearly advanced, and every hour of delay reduced her chances of survival. "Right now, we need to focus on saving your life." The emergency response team arrived within minutes, their heavy footsteps echoing through the now empty hallways. Paramedics in full protective gear entered the lecture hall with equipment designed for biological hazards, their faces obscured by masks and shields. The sight of hazmat-suited first responders treating her like a walking biological weapon completed Emma's humiliation and terror. "Ma'am, we're going to take excellent care of you," the lead paramedic announced through his protective mask. "Can you tell me when these symptoms first appeared?" Emma struggled to think clearly through her fever and shock. "Monday morning, there was an accident at work. I cut my arm on a deli slicer." "Monday morning, and today is Thursday," the paramedic noted grimly, exchanging concerned glances with his partner. "That's 72 hours of progression. We need to move fast." As they prepared to transport her to the university hospital, Emma caught sight of Ashley Parker filming the entire scene from outside the building's glass doors. Her former friend held her phone steady, documenting what would soon become viral content across social media platforms. The irony wasn't lost on Emma. Ashley's family had created the conditions that led to her infection, and now Ashley was exploiting her medical crisis for internet fame. The paramedics loaded Emma onto a specialized stretcher designed for infectious disease transport, their movements efficient but cautious. Professor Harrison walked alongside the gurney, providing medical history and context that could prove crucial for her treatment. As they wheeled her toward the waiting ambulance, Emma could see the gathering crowd of students, faculty, and news crews drawn by the dramatic emergency response. "Professor," Emma whispered as they reached the ambulance doors. "Will you call my grandmother, Dorothy Thompson in Millerville? Tell her I should have listened." "You're going to tell her yourself," Professor Harrison replied firmly. "You're young, you're strong, and we caught this in time." But privately, as he watched the ambulance speed away with its sirens wailing, Professor Harrison feared that 72 hours might have been too long. He pulled out his phone to make the most difficult call of his academic career, informing a poor family in rural Wisconsin that their daughter's life hung in the balance and that the medical bills would likely destroy them financially even if she survived. The empty lecture hall stood as a testament to how quickly normalcy could transform into nightmare. Abandoned exam papers scattered across the floor bore witness to dreams interrupted and futures suddenly uncertain. The sweet smell of infection lingered in the air, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats come not from dramatic external forces, but from the slow, silent progression of neglected wounds and delayed medical care. The University of Wisconsin Hospital's emergency department erupted into controlled chaos as Emma's ambulance screamed into the trauma bay. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the attending emergency physician, had already assembled a specialized team based on the paramedics' radio reports of suspected necrotizing fasciitis. The 45-year-old physician, herself a first-generation college graduate who had fought her way through medical school on scholarships and determination, understood the stakes better than most of her colleagues. "Room 3 is prepped for emergency surgical debridement," Dr. Martinez announced as the paramedics wheeled Emma through the automatic doors. "OR 2 is standing by, and we have infectious disease and plastic surgery en route." Emma's condition had deteriorated significantly during the 20-minute ambulance ride. Her fever had spiked to 103.7 degrees, her blood pressure was dropping, and the area of necrotic tissue had visibly expanded. The sweet, putrid odor of dying flesh filled the trauma room despite the industrial-strength ventilation system, causing several medical students to step back involuntarily. "Talk to me, Emma," Dr. Martinez said, leaning over the gurney while nurses cut away Emma's clothing to assess the full extent of the infection. "Can you tell me exactly when this started?" "Monday morning," Emma whispered through chattering teeth, her body beginning to show signs of septic shock. "Bean and Barrel coffee shop. Deli slicer accident. Thought it was just a cut." Dr. Martinez exposed Emma's arm and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. The infection had progressed far beyond the original wound site, creating a roughly 8-inch area of blackened, putrid tissue that extended from her wrist nearly to her elbow. Dark red streaks radiated outward like poisonous rivers, indicating that the bacterial infection was spreading through her lymphatic system toward her heart. "This is grade 4 necrotizing fasciitis with systemic involvement," Dr. Martinez announced to her team. "We're looking at potential limb loss if we don't get her to surgery immediately. Type and cross-match for 8 units of blood, start her on high-dose clindamycin and penicillin, and get anesthesia down here now." A social worker appeared at Emma's bedside with a tablet computer and an expression of practiced compassion. "Miss Thompson, I'm Sarah Wilson from Patient Financial Services. I need to discuss insurance coverage and payment authorization for your treatment." "I don't have insurance," Emma admitted, the words feeling like a death sentence. "I'm a scholarship student. My family can't afford this." Dr. Martinez looked up from her examination, anger flashing in her dark eyes. "Miss Wilson, this patient is facing potential death or amputation. Financial discussions can wait until after we save her life." "I understand the medical urgency," the social worker replied apologetically, "but hospital policy requires insurance verification before proceeding with major surgical interventions. The estimated cost for emergency surgery, ICU care, and antibiotics could exceed $200,000. Emma's eyes widened with horror that transcended her physical pain. $200,000 represented more money than her family would earn in 5 years. Her father's heart condition had already pushed them to the brink of bankruptcy, and her mother was working herself to exhaustion just to keep their modest house from foreclosure. "Please," Emma begged, tears streaming down her fever-flushed face. "Can't you just amputate the arm? That has to be cheaper than trying to save it." Dr. Martinez knelt beside the gurney, her voice gentle but firm. "Emma, we're not amputating anything we don't have to. And we're certainly not making medical decisions based on your ability to pay. This is America, and we treat patients first, worry about money later." The emergency department doors burst open again as Emma's family arrived from Millerville, having driven the 2-hour journey in record time after Professor Harrison's devastating phone call. Linda Thompson rushed to her daughter's side, her face etched with the kind of terror that only a parent can experience when confronting their child's mortality. "Oh, sweetheart," Linda whispered, gently stroking Emma's hair while carefully avoiding the infected area. "Why didn't you call us? Why didn't you tell us how bad it was?" Robert Thompson stood behind his wife, his own heart condition evident in his labored breathing and pale complexion. The stress of racing to the hospital had clearly taken a toll on his fragile cardiovascular system, but nothing could have kept him away from his daughter's bedside. "Dad, you shouldn't have come," Emma protested weakly. My heart is fine as long as you're okay," Robert replied, though his trembling hands betrayed his own medical fragility. "We're going to get through this together, just like we always do." Grandmother Dorothy arrived last, moving with the deliberate pace of someone whose 78-year-old body had endured decades of physical labor and emotional trauma. But her eyes remained sharp and alert, immediately assessing both Emma's condition and the surrounding medical chaos with the practiced gaze of a former nurse. "I should have insisted on the emergency room Tuesday night," Dot said quietly, guilt evident in her weathered features. "I knew that smell. I've seen this infection before in Korea. Boys dying because we didn't have the right antibiotics or surgical facilities." Dr. Martinez approached the family with the kind of gravity that typically preceded life-altering conversations. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I need to explain Emma's condition and the treatment options. She has a severe bacterial infection called necrotizing fasciitis, commonly known as flesh-eating disease. The bacteria is destroying tissue faster than her body can fight it off." Linda's legs gave out, and she had to grip the side rail of Emma's gurney to remain standing. "Is she going to die?" "Not if I can help it," Dr. Martinez replied firmly. "But she needs emergency surgery within the next hour to remove all the infected tissue. Without surgery, the infection will continue spreading and become fatal. With surgery, she has an excellent chance of recovery, though she may require multiple operations and extensive rehabilitation." "How much will it cost?" Robert asked, the question every uninsured American family dreaded asking in medical emergencies. "That's not your concern right now," Dr. Martinez said. "Wisconsin has emergency Medicaid provisions for situations like this, and the hospital has charity care programs. We'll figure out the finances after we save Emma's life." But Emma had heard enough conversations between her parents about medical debt to understand the implications. Her father's heart attack had already forced them to refinance their house and deplete their savings. Another massive medical bill would destroy the family financially, potentially costing them their home and any hope of economic stability. "I want to call Bean and Beryl," Emma said suddenly, her fever-clouded mind latching onto a desperate hope for justice. "They should pay for this. Their equipment caused the accident." Ashley Parker chose that moment to arrive at the hospital, having followed the ambulance in her BMW. She burst into the emergency department with her phone already recording, documenting what she called exclusive behind-the-scenes access to a medical emergency for her social media followers. "Emma! Oh my God, are you okay?" Ashley exclaimed. positioning herself for the best camera angle while maintaining what she considered a safe distance from potential infection. "My followers are totally concerned about you. This is getting like 50,000 views already." "Get that camera out of here," Dr. Martinez ordered sharply. "This is a medical facility, not a social media studio." "It's okay," Ashley protested. "Emma's my friend. I'm documenting her brave fight against this mysterious illness. People deserve to know what's happening." Linda Thompson's maternal instincts overrode her normally polite Midwestern demeanor. "Young lady, if you don't put that phone away and show some respect for my daughter's privacy, I will personally escort you out of this hospital." Ashley reluctantly lowered her phone, finally confronting the gap between social media performance and real human suffering. For the first time since Monday's accident, she seemed to grasp that Emma's crisis wasn't content to be monetized for internet fame. "Actually," Ashley said quietly, "there's something you should know about the accident. Something about my father's company and the equipment that hurt Emma." Dr. Martinez looked up from her preparation notes. "What kind of information?" "The deli slicer had safety violations. There have been other accidents at other Bean and Barrel locations. My father's been covering them up to avoid liability lawsuits." The revelation hit the Thompson family like a physical blow. Their daughter's life-threatening infection wasn't the result of a random accident or her own carelessness. It was the predictable consequence of corporate negligence and profit-driven corner-cutting. "Are you saying this could have been prevented?" Robert asked, his voice barely controlled. "The equipment should have been recalled months ago," Ashley admitted, finally understanding the weight of her father's business decisions. There were safety reports from 3 other locations about similar injuries. Emma's surgery was scheduled for 3:00 p.m., giving the family 2 hours to grapple with both the medical crisis and the emerging evidence of corporate wrongdoing. Professor Harrison arrived during the pre-surgical preparation, carrying flowers from Emma's classmates and a promise that her academic standing would be protected regardless of how long her recovery required. "The university has emergency protocols for medical withdrawals," he explained to the family. "Emma's scholarship and academic progress are completely secure. Her only job is to focus on getting better." As Emma was wheeled toward the operating room, she squeezed her grandmother's hand with what little strength remained. "Grandma, I'm scared." "Fear is just love with nowhere to go, child," Dot replied, using a phrase she had learned comforting dying soldiers in Korea. "You've got so much love surrounding you right now that there's no room left for anything but healing." The operating room doors closed behind Emma's gurney, leaving her family to begin the agonizing wait that would determine whether their daughter would emerge whole, permanently disabled, or not at all. The surgery lasted 4.5 hours, each minute stretching like an eternity for the Thompson family huddled in the surgical waiting room. Dr. Martinez emerged at 7:30 p.m., still wearing her surgical scrubs, her face bearing the exhausted gravity of someone who had just fought death to a standstill. The family rose collectively as she approached, their faces reflecting the desperate hope and terror that accompanies life-altering medical news. "We removed approximately 6 inches of necrotic tissue from Emma's forearm," Dr. Martinez began, her voice professionally calm despite the magnitude of what she was reporting. "The infection had progressed deeper than our initial assessment indicated. We had to excise muscle tissue, fascia, and part of the radius bone." Linda Thompson's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Will she be able to use her arm?" "The infection damaged several important structures," Dr. Martinez continued carefully. 2 major nerves were compromised, and we had to remove a significant portion of the flexor muscle group. Even with optimal recovery, Emma will likely have permanent limitations in hand function and grip strength. Robert Thompson sank into a plastic chair, the weight of his daughter's altered future crushing down on him. The girl who had dreamed of becoming a doctor, who had worked her way through high school with hands that could perform delicate laboratory work, now faced a lifetime of physical limitations that would reshape every aspect of her planned career. "But she's alive," Grandmother Dot stated firmly, cutting through the family's despair with the practical wisdom of someone who had seen worse outcomes. "Everything else we can work with." Dr. Martinez nodded. "She's alive. And if the infection doesn't return, she'll make a full recovery within those limitations. However, she's developed complications that concern us." The word complications sent a chill through the waiting room. After 4 hours of surgery and the trauma of massive tissue removal, Emma's body was struggling to maintain stability. Her kidney function had deteriorated significantly due to the high-dose antibiotics required to fight the infection, and her blood pressure remained dangerously low despite aggressive fluid resuscitation. "We're moving her to the intensive care unit for close monitoring," Dr. Martinez explained. "The next 48 hours will be critical. If her kidneys don't recover function, she may require dialysis. If the infection returns or spreads, we may need to consider amputation to save her life." The financial counselor who had appeared earlier returned with a thick folder of documents, her expression sympathetic but resolute. "I've calculated the preliminary costs for Emma's treatment," she announced. "Emergency surgery, ICU care, medications, and rehabilitation will likely exceed $300,000. The hospital can offer a payment plan, but we need to discuss options for covering these expenses." Linda Thompson's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. $300,000, she repeated numbly. "That's more than we'll earn in 10 years. How are we supposed to pay for that?" "There are emergency Medicaid provisions for situations like this," the counselor explained, "but Emma's family income may exceed the eligibility thresholds. Student status doesn't automatically qualify for coverage, and her parents' combined income from employment might disqualify her." Robert Thompson's face flushed dangerously as his blood pressure spiked. "So my daughter faces a choice between dying and bankrupting our entire family. That's the American healthcare system working as designed?" Professor Harrison, who had remained quietly supportive throughout the ordeal, stepped forward with information that would prove crucial. "Actually, there may be another option. I've been in contact with the university's legal department about liability issues. If Bean and Barrel's equipment failure caused Emma's injuries, their insurance should cover the medical expenses." Ashley Parker, who had been unusually quiet since her earlier revelation about her father's company, suddenly spoke up. "There's something else you need to know. I've been going through my father's corporate emails, and this isn't the first time this has happened." She produced her phone, scrolling through screenshots she had taken of internal Bean and Barrel communications. 3 other employees at different locations have been injured by the same model of deli slicer in the past 8 months. Each time my father paid them cash settlements and made them sign non-disclosure agreements to avoid reporting the accidents to safety regulators. The implications of Ashley's revelation reverberated through the waiting room like a seismic shock. Emma's injury wasn't an isolated accident or a case of employee carelessness. It was part of a systematic pattern of corporate negligence that prioritized profits over worker safety. "This is evidence of criminal negligence," Professor Harrison observed grimly. "Your father knew the equipment was dangerous and continued using it anyway." Ashley's phone buzzed with an incoming call from her father. She answered on speaker, allowing the entire Thompson family to hear Richard Parker's voice as he attempted to manage what he clearly saw as a public relations crisis. "Ashley, I need you to come home immediately." Richard's voice carried the commanding tone of someone accustomed to having his orders followed without question. "The local news stations are calling about some kind of food poisoning incident involving one of our employees. We need to coordinate our response." "It's not food poisoning, Dad," Ashley replied, her voice steadier than anyone expected. It's necrotizing fasciitis caused by your unsafe equipment. Emma Thompson is in the ICU right now, and she might lose her arm because you knew the deli slicers were dangerous and kept using them anyway." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Richard Parker's voice returned, notably colder and more calculated. "Ashley, you don't understand the complexities of business operations. Accidents happen in food service. The important thing is that we handle this situation appropriately." "Handle it how?" Ashley demanded. "Like you handled the other 3 accidents? Pay off the families and make them sign agreements to keep quiet?" Another pause. Then Richard's voice took on a threatening edge. "Young lady, you're in danger of interfering with legitimate business operations. I suggest you come home immediately before you say something you'll regret." Linda Thompson, who had been listening to this exchange with growing fury, grabbed the phone from Ashley's hands. "Mr. Parker, this is Linda Thompson, Emma's mother. Your daughter just told us that you've known your equipment was dangerous for months and continued using it anyway. My daughter is fighting for her life because of your negligence." "Mrs. Thompson," Richard replied smoothly, "I understand you're upset, but making accusations without proper legal counsel is unwise. Bean and Barrel has excellent safety protocols, and if your daughter was injured, it was likely due to improper equipment usage rather than any mechanical failure." The audacity of blaming Emma for her own injury while she lay unconscious in the ICU pushed Robert Thompson beyond his breaking point. Despite his heart condition, he stood up and took the phone with trembling hands. "Listen to me, you son of a bitch," Robert said, his voice carrying the accumulated rage of a working-class father watching his daughter suffer while the wealthy refused accountability. "My daughter worked 2 jobs to pay for college because people like you shipped all the decent manufacturing jobs overseas. She followed every safety protocol you required, and your broken equipment nearly killed her. If you think you're going to blame her for this, you've got another thing coming." "Mr. Thompson," Richard replied, his voice now openly hostile, "I'd be very careful about making defamatory statements. Bean and Barrel has excellent legal representation, and we don't hesitate to protect our business interests from false accusations." The call ended abruptly, leaving the family and Ashley staring at each other in the aftermath of what amounted to a declaration of war. Richard Parker had made it clear that he intended to fight any attempt to hold his company accountable, regardless of the human cost. Dr. Martinez returned to the waiting room as visiting hours approached, bringing an update that would shape the family's immediate future. "Emma is stable but critical. The infection appears contained, but her kidney function hasn't improved. We're starting dialysis tomorrow morning." "How long will she need dialysis?" Dot asked, her nursing background helping her understand the implications. "That depends on whether her kidneys recover from the antibiotic toxicity," Dr. Martinez replied honestly. "It could be temporary or it could be permanent. We won't know for several more days." As the family prepared for what would likely be the first of many nights spent sleeping in hospital chairs, Ashley made a decision that would define her transformation from privileged bystander to active ally. "I'm not going home," she announced firmly. "I'm staying here with Emma, and I'm going to make sure my father's company pays for every penny of her medical care." 3 weeks into Emma's hospitalization, the cruel mathematics of American healthcare had transformed the Thompson family's crisis from medical to financial catastrophe. Despite the insurance company's initial promises of coverage, Bean and Barrel's legal team had successfully argued that Emma's injuries resulted from employee negligence rather than equipment failure, effectively denying responsibility for the mounting medical bills that now exceeded $400,000. The Wisconsin Department of Health's investigation had stalled mysteriously after Richard Parker hired a former state regulator as a compliance consultant, and the criminal charges that Professor Harrison had confidently predicted never materialized. Corporate influence had quietly neutralized government oversight, leaving the Thompson family to face bankruptcy while fighting for Emma's life. Emma herself remained unconscious for most of the third week, her body overwhelmed by the combination of multiple surgeries, aggressive antibiotic treatments, and kidney failure that required daily dialysis. The young woman who had entered college with dreams of medical school now lay connected to machines that performed basic biological functions her organs could no longer manage independently. Dr. Martinez approached the family with news that would shatter their remaining hope. "Emma's kidneys aren't responding to treatment," she explained, her professional composure barely masking her own frustration with the case. "The antibiotic toxicity appears to have caused permanent damage. She'll require lifelong dialysis unless she receives a kidney transplant." Linda Thompson collapsed into the uncomfortable hospital chair that had become her permanent residence, the weight of this latest devastating news crushing what remained of her emotional resilience. "Lifelong dialysis," she repeated numbly. "How much does that cost?" "Approximately $200,000 per year," Dr. Martinez replied quietly. "Medicare will eventually cover most of the costs, but there's typically a waiting period for eligibility, and the co-payments alone could run $30,000 annually." Robert Thompson's already fragile heart condition deteriorated dramatically under the stress of watching his daughter's declining health and the family's financial destruction. On Thursday morning of the third week, he suffered a massive heart attack in the hospital cafeteria and was rushed to the cardiac ICU just 2 floors above Emma's unit. "This is killing him," Linda confided to grandmother Dot as they maintained vigil between 2 ICU units. "Watching Emma suffer, knowing we can't afford to save her, it's literally breaking his heart." Dot Thompson, drawing on reserves of strength accumulated through nearly 8 decades of surviving life's cruelest tests, became the family's emotional anchor. "We're not giving up," she declared with the fierce determination of someone who had nursed dying soldiers and raised children through the Great Depression. "Emma's going to live, Robert's going to recover, and we're going to find a way through this." But privately, even Dot questioned whether faith and determination could overcome the systemic barriers that seemed designed to crush families like theirs. The medical bills arrived daily, like legal documents from a hostile army, each statement representing years of potential debt that would extend far beyond Emma's recovery. Ashley Parker's transformation from privileged observer to passionate advocate had accelerated dramatically since her father's threatening phone call. She spent her days in the hospital with Emma's family and her nights researching corporate law, medical malpractice precedents, and patient advocacy resources. Her trust fund, originally intended for graduate school and European travel, was being systematically depleted to cover the Thompson family's immediate expenses. "I found something," Ashley announced breathlessly, bursting into the ICU waiting room with her laptop and a thick folder of printed documents. "There's a whistleblower at Bean & Barrel's corporate headquarters. Someone leaked internal safety reports that prove my father knew the equipment was defective." The documents Ashley had obtained painted a damning picture of corporate negligence that extended far beyond Emma's isolated case. Internal memos revealed that Bean & Barrel's management had received safety warnings about the deli slicer model from 3 different equipment manufacturers, 7 injured employees, and 2 insurance company risk assessments. Each warning had been systematically ignored or covered up to avoid the costs of replacing equipment across 57 franchise locations. Professor Harrison, who had become an unofficial advocate for the Thompson family, examined the leaked documents with the careful attention of someone who understood both scientific evidence and institutional corruption. "This is criminal negligence," he concluded. "Your father continued using equipment he knew was dangerous, and he systematically covered up injuries to avoid accountability." But the leaked documents also revealed the sophisticated legal strategies that Bean & Barrel employed to avoid liability. The company maintained a network of law firms, public relations specialists, and political connections specifically designed to neutralize potential lawsuits and regulatory investigations. Emma's case represented just one battle in a larger war between corporate power and individual justice. "They have unlimited resources to fight us," Linda observed despairingly. "We can't even afford Emma's medical bills, let alone hire lawyers to take on a corporation." Ashley's phone rang with another call from her father, this time displaying the caller ID of Bean & Barrel's corporate headquarters rather than his personal number. She answered on speaker, allowing the Thompson family to hear Richard Parker's latest attempt at damage control. "Ashley, I'm calling from the office with our legal team present." Richard's voice carried the formal tone of someone speaking for the record. "We're prepared to offer the Thompson family a settlement of $100,000 plus coverage of current medical expenses, contingent on signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. The offer represented both a tacit admission of guilt and a calculated business decision. $100,000 would cover the family's immediate debts, but wouldn't begin to address Emma's lifelong medical needs or provide compensation for her permanent disabilities." "What about her future medical care?" Ashley demanded. "Emma will need dialysis for the rest of her life. $100,000 won't even cover 1 year of treatment. Future medical expenses are the responsibility of Emma's healthcare providers and insurance coverage," Richard replied coldly. "Bean & Barrel is offering this settlement purely as a gesture of goodwill, not an admission of liability." Linda Thompson had heard enough corporate doublespeak to recognize the manipulation underlying the offer. "You're asking us to take a settlement that won't even pay for Emma's first year of dialysis, and in exchange we have to promise never to tell anyone what you did to her?" "Mrs. Thompson," Richard replied with practiced patience, "this is a very generous offer, considering that our preliminary investigation suggests Emma's injuries resulted from failure to follow proper safety protocols. We're under no legal obligation to offer anything." The audacity of continuing to blame Emma while she lay unconscious and permanently disabled pushed Robert Thompson, despite his own recent heart attack, to respond with fury that transcended his physical limitations. "You knew that equipment was dangerous," Robert said, his voice weakened by cardiac medication, but strengthened by paternal rage. "You had reports from other employees who got hurt, and you chose profits over their safety. My daughter might die because you were too cheap to replace a broken machine." The phone went silent for nearly a minute before Richard Parker's voice returned, stripped of all pretense of sympathy or negotiation. "Mr. Thompson, I strongly advise you to consult with legal counsel before making any more defamatory statements. Bean & Barrel has significant resources to protect our reputation from false accusations. The threat was unmistakable. Accept the inadequate settlement and remain silent, or face a legal battle that would financially destroy the family even if they ultimately won. Corporate America's standard playbook for crushing individual plaintiffs relied on the simple mathematics of legal warfare: unlimited corporate resources versus families already bankrupted by medical expenses. Dr. Martinez returned to the waiting room as the family processed Richard Parker's ultimatum, bringing medical news that would complicate their decision even further. "Emma's showing signs of brain swelling," she announced grimly. "The kidney failure has caused a buildup of toxins that her dialysis isn't fully clearing. We need to perform emergency surgery to relieve pressure on her brain." "More surgery means more medical bills," Linda said numbly, the practical concerns of survival overwhelming emotional responses to her daughter's deteriorating condition. "Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Martinez said firmly, "we perform whatever medical procedures are necessary to save your daughter's life. The billing department can worry about payment later." As Emma was wheeled into emergency neurosurgery, Ashley made a decision that would define not only her own future, but the ultimate outcome of the Thompson family's fight for justice. She called her father's corporate number and spoke directly to the legal team that had been strategizing against Emma's family. "This is Ashley Parker," she announced, her voice carrying a newfound authority that surprised even herself. "I'm calling to inform you that I will not be honoring any non-disclosure agreements, and I will be testifying publicly about Bean & Barrel's systematic cover-up of safety violations." The legal team's response was swift and brutal. Within hours, Ashley received formal notification that her trust fund had been frozen, her college tuition payments had been suspended, and her name had been removed from all family financial accounts. Richard Parker's message was clear. Loyalty to family meant complicity in corporate wrongdoing. But Ashley's rebellion had also triggered something unexpected. Media attention that Bean & Barrel couldn't control through legal maneuvering or political influence. Local news stations, drawn initially by the dramatic medical emergency on campus, began investigating the broader pattern of corporate negligence that Ashley's leaked documents had revealed. By the end of the third week, Emma Thompson's case had evolved from a personal tragedy into a symbol of systemic injustice that resonated far beyond Wisconsin. Social media campaigns demanding corporate accountability spread across college campuses, while investigative journalists uncovered similar cover-ups at restaurant chains nationwide. The Thompson family faced a stark choice: accept Richard Parker's inadequate settlement and watch Emma suffer in silence, or continue fighting a legal and public relations battle that might destroy them financially while potentially saving countless other families from similar tragedies. As Emma emerged from brain surgery with her survival still uncertain, her family prepared for a confrontation that would test whether individual courage could ultimately triumph over institutional power. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source on a Tuesday morning in Emma's fourth week of hospitalization. Sarah Chen, a third-year investigative journalism student at Northwestern University, had been following Emma's story through Ashley's social media posts and Professor Harrison's academic network connections. Chen's own family had immigrated from Taiwan with dreams of American opportunity, only to face similar battles against institutional indifference when her father was injured in a construction accident involving defective safety equipment. Chen arrived at the University of Wisconsin Hospital carrying a laptop bag filled with documents that would ultimately transform Emma's personal tragedy into a national reckoning with corporate accountability. "I've been investigating Bean & Barrel for my senior thesis," she explained to the Thompson family. "What happened to Emma isn't isolated. It's part of a systematic pattern that spans multiple states and involves dozens of injured workers." The evidence Chen had compiled was devastating in its scope and detail. Internal corporate communications revealed that Bean & Barrel's executive team had calculated the costs of potential lawsuits against the expense of replacing defective equipment across their franchise network. The cold mathematics of corporate risk management had determined that paying occasional settlements was more profitable than ensuring worker safety. "They have a budget line item called Incident Management," Chen explained, scrolling through leaked financial documents on her laptop. Last year alone, they paid out $1.2 million in worker injury settlements while avoiding $8.3 million in equipment replacement costs. Dr. Martinez emerged from Emma's room with news that marked a crucial turning point in her medical battle. "Emma's brain swelling has stabilized and she's responding to verbal stimuli," she announced with the first genuine smile the family had seen in weeks. "Her kidney function is showing marginal improvement, and we're cautiously optimistic about reducing her dialysis frequency." Emma's eyes fluttered open for the first time in 5 days, focusing slowly on her mother's tear-streaked face hovering above her hospital bed. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice barely audible through the oxygen mask. "Am I going to be okay?" Linda Thompson's emotional dam burst completely as she grasped her daughter's hand, feeling responsive pressure for the first time since the emergency surgery. "You're going to be fine, sweetheart. You're going to be just fine." But Emma's recovery came with brutal realities that no amount of parental love could soften. Her right arm remained largely paralyzed below the elbow, with minimal sensation in her fingers and no functional grip strength. The nerve damage from the infection was permanent, effectively ending her dreams of becoming a surgeon or pursuing any career requiring fine motor skills. "I can't feel my fingers," Emma said, staring at her bandaged arm with the dawning comprehension of someone confronting lifelong limitations. "I can't move them at all." Dr. Martinez sat beside Emma's bed with the careful attention of someone delivering life-altering information. "The infection damaged several major nerves beyond our ability to repair them. You'll regain some function with physical therapy, but your dominant hand will remain significantly impaired." Ashley Parker, who had maintained vigil alongside the Thompson family despite being financially cut off from her own parents, leaned forward with news that would reshape Emma's perspective on her situation. "Emma, there's something you need to know. Your case has become national news. Dozens of other bean and barrel workers have come forward with similar injuries. You're not alone in this fight." The revelation that her suffering had exposed a broader pattern of corporate negligence provided Emma with a sense of purpose that transcended her personal tragedy. If her destroyed arm could prevent other young workers from facing similar injuries, perhaps the devastating cost had served a greater good. Sarah Chen positioned her laptop where Emma could see the screen, displaying a website she had created documenting Bean and Barrel's systematic safety violations. 47 workers across 12 states, Chen explained, all injured by the same defective equipment model, all pressured to sign non-disclosure agreements, all blamed for their own injuries. Emma studied the photographs of other young people, college students, single mothers, recent immigrants, whose lives had been similarly shattered by corporate cost-cutting. Their faces reflected her own experience of trying to work their way toward better futures, only to be broken by systems designed to exploit their economic vulnerability. "What can we do?" Emma asked, her voice growing stronger despite her physical weakness. "How do we stop this from happening to other people?" Professor Harrison, who had spent weeks researching legal precedents and regulatory frameworks, presented a strategy that could potentially transform individual tragedy into systemic change. "We file a federal lawsuit under the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's whistleblower protection statutes," he explained. "But more importantly, we take this story national and force Congress to examine corporate immunity laws." The plan required Emma to become the public face of workplace safety reform, testifying before congressional committees and media outlets about corporate negligence in American business practices. For a shy scholarship student from rural Wisconsin, the prospect of national attention felt almost as terrifying as the medical emergency she had survived. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," Emma admitted, looking at her paralyzed arm and considering the emotional toll of reliving her trauma for public consumption. Grandmother Dot, drawing on the wisdom accumulated through 8 decades of surviving institutional indifference, took her granddaughter's functional hand and spoke with quiet authority. "Sometimes the Lord breaks us down so we can build others up, child. Your pain has meaning if it protects other families from facing what we've been through." Ashley's phone buzzed with an incoming call from her father's attorney, offering what would be Bean and Barrel's final settlement proposal. Richard Parker had increased his offer to $5 million plus lifetime medical coverage, contingent on Emma signing agreements that would prevent her from ever discussing her case publicly or testifying about corporate safety practices. $5 million? Linda whispered, the sum representing more money than the Thompson family could have imagined accumulating in several lifetimes. That would solve all our financial problems. Emma would never have to worry about medical bills or college costs. But Emma understood that accepting the settlement would mean abandoning the 47 other workers whose cases Chen had documented, along with countless future employees who would face similar dangers if Bean and Barrel's practices remained unchanged. "They're offering us $5 million to stay quiet about something that could hurt thousands of other people," Emma said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone in the room. "That's not money, that's a bribe." The decision to reject the settlement and pursue federal litigation launched Emma into a battle that would consume the next 18 months of her life. Congressional hearings, media interviews, and legal depositions transformed her from an anonymous college student into a national symbol of corporate accountability and worker protection. Bean and Barrel's response was swift and merciless, deploying private investigators to scrutinize Emma's personal life, hiring public relations firms to discredit her testimony, and filing counter-lawsuits alleging defamation and corporate sabotage. The legal warfare nearly destroyed the Thompson family's sanity, but it also exposed the sophisticated machinery that corporate America uses to silence individual voices. Sarah Chen's journalistic investigation expanded into a book deal and documentary film that brought international attention to American workplace safety issues. Ashley Parker's decision to testify against her own father's company inspired other privileged young people to examine their family's business practices and speak out against inherited corruption. The ultimate legal victory came not through individual litigation, but through federal legislation that Emma's case had catalyzed. The Emma Thompson Worker Protection Act established mandatory equipment safety standards, eliminated non-disclosure agreements for workplace injuries, and created federal oversight mechanisms that prioritized worker welfare over corporate profits. Emma's graduation from the University of Wisconsin took place 2 years behind her original schedule, but she crossed the stage with a law degree focused on occupational safety advocacy rather than the medical degree she had originally planned. Her paralyzed right arm had become a symbol of resilience rather than limitation, proof that individual courage could ultimately triumph over institutional power. Standing at the podium during her graduation speech, Emma looked out at an audience that included her parents, her grandmother, Ashley Parker, Professor Harrison, Dr. Martinez, and Sarah Chen, the community of support that had carried her through the darkest period of her life. "Sometimes," Emma said, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium, "the most important lessons come not from textbooks, but from learning that ordinary people can change the world when they refuse to accept injustice as inevitable." The applause that followed wasn't just for Emma's academic achievement, but for a victory that belonged to every worker who would never face the dangers she had survived. Dear friends, Emma's journey reminds us that life's most devastating moments often become the foundation for our greatest contributions to the world. When that young woman's sleeve slipped in biology class, revealing the horror that would change everything, she had no idea she was about to transform from victim to victor, from patient to protector of countless others. Her grandmother Dot's wisdom echoes through generations. "Sometimes the Lord breaks us down so we can build others up." How many of us have discovered that our deepest wounds became the source of our strongest purpose? Emma's paralyzed arm didn't end her dreams. It redirected them toward something more meaningful than she ever imagined. Her courage to reject $5 million in silence money, choosing justice over comfort, proves that ordinary people can indeed change the world. Through her pain, 47 other families found their voices, and future generations of workers gained protection. Sometimes our scars become our most beautiful testimonies, showing others that survival is possible, that hope endures, and that even broken people can build something whole and good for those who come after us. What moment in your life transformed pain into purpose? How has your greatest challenge become your most meaningful contribution? Share your story in the comments below. your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.